For months, all people have been talking about is the 8K Canon EOS R5, but now SonyAlphaRumors.com is saying Sony has a new full-frame camera that's going to be announced in June. I think it could be one of 3 different cameras. I'll tell you exactly what I think it is in just a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes any type of website simple to set up and beautiful to use. I just set up a brand new Squarespace website today, but it's still secret. You'll see it soon. And I chose Squarespace because they make every website look fantastic, whether people are using a smartphone, a tablet, and I can set up a store to sell stuff super simple. If you know somebody who's doing business from home or just wants to represent their photography work in the most beautiful way possible, Squarespace is the best way to do it. Sign up now for a free trial at squarespace.com/Tony. After 14 days, if you love it, use the coupon code Tony and you'll get 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace. First, my low end and what I consider to be the least likely prediction, a Sony Alpha 5. A low-end full-frame camera intended to compete with the Canon EOS RP. The Canon EOS RP goes for like $900, but it's a full-frame camera with a flip screen and like fantastic focusing, and it's actually what we record these on. I think we own 8 of them now. Sony does not have a camera in that segment. If you want a $1,000 Sony camera, you have to get an APS-C camera, but that means you mostly should use their APS-C lenses, and they're not quite as good as the full-frame lenses, and there are a lot of people who want a lower end full frame camera. Right now, if you want that, the first possibility I think is the least likely, and that's a low-end full-frame camera that I'll call the Sony Alpha 5. This would compete with the Canon EOS RP. The Canon EOS RP goes for like $900, but it's a full-frame camera with a flip screen and like fantastic focusing, and it's actually what we record these on. I think we own 8 of them now. Sony does not have a camera in that segment, giving people full use of the entire range of full-frame lenses. I think that's really important in the Sony lineup because their APS-C lenses, they're kind of weak compared to the full-frame lenses. This would need to be priced below $1,000 to really compete. I think they could continue to use that same 24-megapixel sensor that they've been using since the original Sony A7, but give it just one SD card slot, give it a low-quality electronic viewfinder, no IBIS, no sensor stabilization, and a smaller number of frames per second. They currently have the Sony A7 Mark II at this price point, but we kind of hated that camera because the autofocusing was just very, very primitive. So it could basically be a refresh of that camera, but with the updated focusing system. I think they would choose to put it in the body of the APS-C Sony A6600. That's a little bit bigger than their old APS-C cameras, but substantially smaller than bigger cameras like the Sony A7 Mark III that they intend more for professionals. And I think putting it in a smaller body would help differentiate it from the higher end cameras and reduce the cannibalization a little bit. If they do that, I think they should then move the Sony A7 Mark III down in price point to about $1,500. As a reminder, the Sony A7 Mark III has been really the most popular and interesting camera for the past couple of years. It has driven so many enthusiasts and professionals alike from Canon and Nikon and Fuji over to the Sony system. The Sony A7 Mark III still works great, but it's not in their latest body. It doesn't have all the new software features like Animal IAF, and thus I think it might be time for a refresh that I'll predict it's called the Sony A7 Mark IV. I bet it's still going to have that same sensor and the same just below $2,000 price point, but they'll give it the better weather sealing. They'll upgrade the SD card slots to dual UHS 2, just like they did in the A7R Mark IV and the A9. They'll give it a better quality electronic viewfinder and all those new software features, and otherwise it'll be pretty much the same. This will allow them to push down the existing Sony A7 Mark III in price, but continue to sell it. I think they'll give the A7 IV upgraded video capabilities too, because it has been extremely popular with wedding photographers who shoot hybrid stills and video. And cameras like the Nikon Z6 and Panasonic S1 started to become appreciated for their video capabilities. I think they'll bump it up to full width 4K 60. I think they'll also give it 6K at 30 frames per second with a direct readout. Now, internally, the Sony a7 Mark III does read 6K at almost full width, like a 1.2 crop when it's reading 1:1. So all they need to do is to take that data and output it into a file instead of scaling it down into the 4K file that we now get. I think to match those competing full-frame cameras, they'll have to give it 10-bit video, as well as the ability to output raw video over HDMI. Everybody else has done it, so it seems like a layup for Sony. I also hope that they'll give us H.265. Not only is it more efficient, but it will allow them to reduce the bitrate while maintaining the same quality, which is gonna be important since Sony isn't upgrading their SD card slots to something a little faster. The thing we're most excited about is the possibility that we'll see the Sony a7S Mark III finally. It has been so many years since the a7S Mark II came out, and it was so well respected as a video camera, particularly for its low light capabilities. As a reminder, the Sony a7S Mark II had a 12 megapixel sensor, full frame, but that's weird, right? That's a super low number, and basically nobody used it for stills, but it allowed you to do a 1:1 readout for 4K video, which at the time was pretty exciting. It's really aged though. The autofocus system on it is considered very primitive now. It's contrast-based focusing only, so it can't like match your eye like the video system that I'm using now. But the video out of it was absolutely gorgeous. It just needs a little bit of a refresh. Sony's refreshed their other cameras. Why not put the a7S into this new body? I would have guessed it would have been 12 megapixels and 4K 120. But Canon is pushing the EOS R5 so much, and people are so excited about it, that if Sony now comes out with just a 4K camera, I think the entire press community and all the enthusiasts are going to kind of scoff. I think Sony feels pressure to match Canon's 8K capabilities. Thus, I think they might repurpose the 42 megapixel sensor from the Sony a7R Mark III and output 8K video from that. I think that could be a real challenge. I think they might do this, but revert back to those overheating problems that they were kind of known for in the past. But I also think that might not stop Sony. It'll definitely have sensor stabilization, and I think they'll easily do 10 frames per second with it. I think they'll give it a flip up screen like they have in the A6400. I personally would prefer a side flip screen, but at this point, putting any kind of flip screen on a full frame camera would be a real first for the Sony E-mount anyway. And like the other cameras of this format, it would have 2 UHS 2 card slots. This is a video camera that a lot of people would be excited about, particularly Sony users who like that sort of mirrorless format. I want to point out, if they repurpose that 42 megapixel sensor, that would not be enough width to do 8K DCI. So this would be standard 8K, perhaps with a little bit of a crop. And I think if they're going to put that video onto an SD card, they would not be able to output raw 8K because there wouldn't be the bandwidth to the SD card. So I think they would have to do H.265 internal and perhaps 8K raw externally over HDMI if you use like an Atomos recorder. I think it would definitely be able to do 4K 120 just like the EOS R5 with 10-bit, and I think they'll upgrade the autofocus system to not just provide IAF during video like their other cameras do, but to provide more cinematic, smooth video options. I find the current Sony cameras to be very jerky when you're trying to record video. What about apps or cloud syncing or cellular connections or an upgraded menu system or a better touchscreen or internal storage? These are all things we've been asking for, but I don't think now is the time Sony is going to answer those requests. I do hope they'll come sometime, but I don't think it's going to be in 2020. Now I'm turning it over to you. What do you want from Sony cameras? They do watch these videos. They will look at the comments. So write a comment and tell me precisely what you want in their next generation cameras, and maybe even what you're willing to pay for it. The public opinion can sway future product planning. And now I want to thank my sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes incredible websites incredibly easy to set up. They're perfect for photographers who often have to have multiple different portfolios. One for weddings, one for corporate headshots, one for fine art, because you want to really show your clients a focused view of your brand. One Squarespace website isn't enough, but you should start with one. Head to squarespace.com/Tony. Get a 14-day free trial. Make your pictures look absolutely stunning. And when you love it, and I know you will, sign up using the coupon code TONY to get 10% off. Thank you, Squarespace.